Hello again. Yeah, we're back again. It's an emergency podcast again. We're getting used to these. You know the format. Welcome to another emergency podcast brought to you by Argo Life and the Green and White podcast. They say we don't like the merry-go-round. I think at the moment we're firmly on it. Plymouth Argyle are about to appoint their 6th head coach in the last 4 years. Following the news that Schalke, well, an unnamed Bundesliga 2 team, but it's fairly common knowledge, it is Schalke, have triggered Miron's release clause in his contract, thus meaning that he now has the opportunity to speak to them. And if you check out all the social medias, it would appear that all the eggs are in line for Miron to head to Gelsenkirchen to continue his career after the briefest of 4 month spells in Devon. And it was an interesting 4 months. I'm sure we'll touch on it over the course of the next 2 hours or so. Don't forget, Sam Dan will be with us later, so the likelihood of overrunning is highly likely. As you can see, joining me for the first half of tonight's show before we go for some oranges at 9:30, we have Graham and James. And delighted to say, rejoining us for tonight's special episode is Scott Coyne, Belgium football expert, and probably the man who knows Miron Muslich the best out of all three of us. This is your show. This is an interactive show, so do get your comments, your thoughts, your questions into us. We will come to as many of them as we can, as you would expect. And those of you who've seen our emergency podcast before, these are incredibly popular shows. There are a lot of questions, a lot of comments, so do bear with me. I will try and get to as many of them as I can over the next 2 hours. So, Scott, I'm going to throw you straight into the lion's den, unfortunately. Let's come to you first. Things have sort of snowballed very quickly since last Wednesday. Of course, last week, we announced 2 signings, Jamie Patterson and Caleb Watts, both of whom talked very highly of Miron Muslich's passion when they spoke to him. Miron Muslich spoke very highly of both players, about how they were going to fit into his style of football. Fast forward it 7 days on, and we're making plans for this show. What on earth has gone on?
Well, the exit was as quick as the arrival. That much is certain, and equally unexpected, I suppose. I think, this kind of broke obviously last night. I think the release clause was triggered yesterday afternoon, and has happened very, very quickly. There has been interest lingering around Miron for a while, actually, not unsurprisingly, but interest is very, very different, obviously, to a clause being kind of triggered. First of all, my commiserations to all Argyle fans. I think the last 24 hours have been pretty bruising for you guys, and I can understand that. As a football fan myself, I had an experience in my own club in the past, where there was a manager in place who was universally adored. Everyone bought into the brand, to what was happening, were absolutely on board, and this individual disappeared overnight in very similar circumstances to this. So I understand kind of how this feels. I think there's been a lot of talk, obviously, amongst the hurt over the last 24 hours around the narrative here, and how that transpired in terms of timescales and how engineered certain things were or not. I don't believe the exit was engineered any earlier than over the last 48 hours, despite the interest, because it didn't become a real option for Miron until about 48 hours ago. Until your agent calls and goes, your release clause has been triggered, do you want to talk? Then nothing else really matters. And the fact that only a few days ago, obviously, he was still talking to 2 new signings, suggests that he was very much on the job, and the intention was to stay. But it becomes a different game, obviously, when the phone goes and an offer of this nature kind of comes along. You have to decide very, very quickly what you're going to do about that. And I'm sure we'll get into the detail a bit more as to the nuances of why make that choice, and how we've got to this point. But the thing is, what I would say to all Argyle fans is, and this includes me sitting here tonight, I'm not sure if we're in Miron's shoes ourselves yesterday afternoon, probably when that call comes in, whether we do anything differently, to be honest. You know, I mean, it's very easy to, I think, you know, have an emotional response to this, you know, but you know, when you look at it slightly more dispassionately, just from a kind of job point of view, then you know you have a decision to make very, very quickly. And I think we would all probably make exactly the same decision that he had. But I do believe, not just because I know him a bit, I do believe he was committed to the club, and up until about 48 hours ago, the call comes, and you know, there are a very small number of clubs, in truth, that can offer the sort of project that he's now been presented with now. So you have to decide whether that's right for you, and you don't have. Sometimes you have a couple of hours to think this over, really, before you have to make a decision. And family was a big impact in the ultimate decision that he made in the end. Obviously, football's a very peripatetic job, particularly as a coach. You move around a lot. A lot of coaches work a long distance away from their families, so that's normal. But Miron spent the last 4 and a bit years working full time away from his family. So this is the first time since he left Austria as a younger coach a number of years ago when he's actually been given the opportunity to go and work somewhere that's quite close to home. So that's very attractive, obviously, to him as well, along with various aspects of Schalke. Yeah.
For those watching, and we're 7 minutes in, and we've already got more people joining us now than what we had for most of our match review pods. We're already at the 1,000 mark, so massive thank you. Do get sharing the live stream around. It's going to be a busy night, as these often are. James, I'll come to you before I come to you, Graham. Is the frustration around this more to do with, it's got nothing to do with Miron's, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's got anything to do with Miron's desire to be closer to his family or Schalke as a club. Is Argyle's frustration here just how things have played out since the Leeds game, timings wise, and with everything that's gone on the last couple of weeks, with seemingly the club backing Muslich with what he asked for quite publicly towards the end of the season? Is that where the frustration's coming from?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think the frustrations really come from Miron choosing a big club like Schalke near close to home. Like, that's not really the frustration. I don't really think the frustration from my side either is really kind of even the quality of the coach we're losing, because in a way I can seem to oscillate between, oh, we've lost a great caliber of coach, to this is someone who came in, didn't keep us up, actually had some pretty terrible runs of form within the big 6 pointers, and you know, we played some pretty turgid football in that. So I was never really wedded to Muslich so much as like a footballing sort of brain, and I never really was sort of attached myself to him, to his brand of football in that way. It was more that we just got the man, the plan, his coaches, the recruitment that he wanted, the structure of the club. Just look, this is the first time that I feel like we've got the backroom staff into a real shape where, you know, if you look at, you know, Foster was probably the clear example of us. He had zero backroom staff. Then Rooney's backroom staff was a mixed bag. And then, you know, the Muslich backroom staff, just so much that from that point of view. And then you've got the frustration of, yeah, the way, exactly as you said, the way it's played out, how he sort of the comments being made in the 3 press conferences around the Leeds game, where it sort of started to be questioned about his future. He wasn't really committing, sort of calling the board out on elements of the sort of backroom operation that he wanted or didn't see fit, that he didn't see fit. And actually those comments were quite sort of questionably sort of pitch towards reality, because we did have recruitment consultants in, we did have director of football consultants in. I think it's even transpired that Tom Randall, who is now our recruitment head, was actually working at the club at the time that Miron was saying we don't have a recruitment team. So this stuff doesn't really play out. So he's sort of bending the truth to his advantage. He's pitching himself against the board, which I wrote about at length in a newsletter, if anyone reads. And then we've seen to have gone even further, pushed even more resources away, restructured the club away from our existing structure, which obviously had a director of football. We've not really able to find the right candidate. We've gone for a different setup because we feel that Muslich can take some of those responsibilities from a sporting director. We've obviously sort of molded and shaped the staff around him, and you can measure the time in days between that being sorted and him exiting. So the frustrations are that we just got sorted and set up and we look good and we were set to have what could have been a really good season. So that's a frustration. Also, I do think the frustrations are, well, I don't think anyone would seriously criticize the choice that he's made in terms of where he's gone. It's the manner of which it's been conducted over the last weeks of those comments he made, the way he positioned himself, the way he got what he wanted and then left. It doesn't really, it stinks.
Graham, we joked backstage before going live that we're well used to this situation now, where managers, as a comment came up on screen a minute ago, they're using Argyle as a stepping stone, and some would say we need to learn our place in the food chain a little bit better. It goes all the way back. Obviously, we were hurt when Ian Holloway left to go to Leicester back in 2007, and it spiraled from there. Where does this one sit for you? This I don't know, the change of head coach, because it's been fabricated by elsewhere. It's been taken out of Argyle's hands with this release clause being met by Schalke. And if stories are led to believe, then Hull tried but either didn't want to or couldn't afford to pay the release clause. Where does it all sit with you in all the managerial changes we've had?
One of the least surprising, if I'm honest, because as you will know, Joe, I've long been of the view, in the way that he presented himself at the two press conferences, refused to answer the simple question. And tellingly for me, his walk around the perimeter of the pitch in the final home game, he barely made eye contact with the fans. And I thought, that's odd. Then you bear in mind, he has a very active agency group. I think they're Pro Transfer, I think they're called. They would have been aware of his release clause, compensation payment, call it what you want. They only get paid if they can move him on to another club. And there's a question for Scott. Do you think his agents were actively looking for other clubs to put it on the table to give him an option? Because why else would Hull, Hanover, Cologne, and now Schalke be interested if his agent wasn't pushing his name around, or the potential to get him out of Argyle and get him into a new club? That's a question I'd like to know. Secondly, I can't blame him. Schalke, nobody in his position would turn that down. Just, they wouldn't. And I can't say I forgive him, but I understand why that decision was made. It's a no-brainer. Not quite like Stephen Schumacher going to Stoke, which wasn't the same. This is what, the third biggest attendance club in the German leagues. They've gone through a terrible time. The potential to stamp his name, get them up the league, or even get them promoted, would far exceed any ability to get the League One promotion or even mid-table championship. That job is just perfect for his persona, if I can put it like that. And we did briefly discuss before we came on air I'm interested to learn whether his assistant manager and head of performance will follow, because if they don't, they're in post with Argyle. And we did discuss, Scott, and I think it's worth discussing with everybody the credentials that they have, because what I gathered from listening to them speak, I mean, Adin is highly regarded as a coach, even though he's only just 31. Highly regarded. Eddie Lattimore has got one of the reputations of getting teams very fit. I think Miron made that point with Cercle Bruges. And we've got two guys currently in the club who are very talented in their roles. And I just wonder whether there's any way that we can keep them and develop them and make them the face of the new Argyle, or whether you think, Scott, they're going to go.
Well, I think all of those kind of backroom details, certainly Miron's end, are kind of yet to be tied up. I think there's an opportunity here for Argyle if they want to go down that road and try and make an appointment like that to kind of get a bit ahead of this and to do that. I think if there's a willingness in some of those individuals certainly to stay and to move into a role like that, then that's a conversation probably, that should be happening certainly now, as early as this.
Well, I know they had a board meeting at 2:00 today, so
okay.
I was at the club. So.
Okay. Yep. Well, I mean, I think I think those questions should certainly be being asked right now, so everybody knows where they are. I think that's for sure. I think in terms of Miron's agents, I suppose it's worth reminding everybody that it's an agent's job to speak to clubs on behalf of their clients constantly. Not just in a situation where a manager may or may not be unhappy. And my understanding is that he actually wasn't. Things weren't, completely rosy. There were some concerns, but he wasn't unhappy in the sense that there'd been a specific instruction, get me out here. I know that for a fact, but it's just normal that agents would be speaking to clubs. Schalke's triggering of the clause was actually quite a sudden thing and was actually prompted by intensifying interest, I think, over the last week from some other German clubs, and I think Schalke have actually gambled on moving quicker than everybody else, which is essentially what they've done to get to a point where they have that exclusive access to reach an agreement with them that others can't have in the meantime. So I think to a certain extent that option has taken everybody by surprise as well. But yeah, it's just a natural part of football, I think, at all levels, that if you have a decent agency, then they're constantly talking to people. Sometimes opportunities and offers come along when you least expect them. I think Miron is maybe slightly surprised by, the suddenness of an offer of the size of a club of Schalke coming along like that. I mean, the other two German clubs who were interested aren't small clubs either, but, you mentioned it there. I mean, Schalke's average attendances this season were the third highest in the Bundesliga 2, but across the whole of Germany, and the Bundesliga 2 is one of the most highly attended leagues in Europe. I think, average attendances at their lowest are in the mid 30,000s, and Schalke have 62,000 for every home game. So, it's like I was saying at the beginning, I think there's a very small number of clubs who, when they pick up the phone, you're like, yeah, let's have a conversation. Because they can offer something that very few clubs actually can. I think the financial realities, obviously, of League One in England and the Bundesliga 2 are very different for lots of reasons as well. Obviously, bigger crowds, bigger stadiums, generally better infrastructure and facilities as well. It's just a bit of a game changer in terms of the kind of the professional side of the like for like for it. And when you're ambitious, sometimes you think, okay, I have to make quite a snap decision and roll the dice here a little bit. If you do well, as you were saying, then all the spoils are there for somebody in Miron's situation. If you don't, then equally it does damage your career a little bit again. In the short to medium term. But that's, I think, part of the judgment when you do roll the dice like that and have to make such a quick decision. I think he was aware that probably there was a concrete offer that was coming from somebody. It was just a question of who. Hull's interest was real, but Hull were not prepared to pay the release clause and to go down that road. And release clauses, actually, fans don't like them, but they're actually not a bad thing. They are there to protect both parties. The odd thing about them is, and I'm sure we'll touch on this as well over the next hour or so, although there's a specified figure in a release clause, that doesn't mean that's the figure you actually get. It can be negotiated down, around, and how the payments work is part of the conversation that is, still not completely agreed between Argyle and Schalke, but everybody expects, a compromise to be found. And the offer of the friendly that's been thrown into the mix will have a financial element to it. I think Schalke are being kind of quite cute with how they've gone about this. So instead of there being a situation where Argyle say, okay, this is the release clause fee in the contract. We want all of that up front. That's our terms. Schalke have come back and said, okay, we'll pay X amount up front, but the rest will be in installments. And part of that will be a financial element tied to the offer of a friendly. But that's obviously not completely agreed yet, so we don't know what the final figure will actually be.
Who'd have thought it, eh? The money we missed out on Michael Cooper not getting promoted to the Premier League on Saturday afternoon, we're going to recoup anyway, just not in the circumstances we wanted. Scott, I'm going to come on to the whole talk of compensation and what's been offered by Schalke in a second, because that's obviously proved to be a big talking point this afternoon. Just backtracking a couple of weeks to those frankly extraordinary press conferences that I think took everybody by surprise, where Miron publicly called the Argyle board of directors out for the lack of structures that were in place and things. Did that come as a surprise to you? With how Muslich, did that surprise you that he was so public in calling out the Argyle hierarchy, and did that ring an alarm bell with you as to his position at the time then, or not?
Not really. I think it's in completely in keeping with the character of the man, in that he does tend to answer things very, very directly in a way that the vast majority of coaches don't. Most coaches tend to dance around even non-difficult, controversial questions and, give very dull answers lacking in substance and are kind of quite non-committal. He's very, very direct in that sense. I always read that particular press conference as an attempt to put pressure on the board to get in place what had been missing. From Miron's perspective, I think he was also signalling to the fan base, look, there are some issues here that the club needs to address, both for the club's sake but also for mine if I'm to remain here. So in some respects, it's obviously a very clear challenge, but it's also just about being honest about what's going on, so everyone knows really where they are. There is the subtext to that as well, of course, is, look, if this doesn't happen, then I can't stay. Some of the bigger questions around it now are, although the structure has changed and there are some new people in post, is that structure completely to Miron's liking? How much of those appointments was he entirely happy with? Those sorts of questions as well. So one way of looking at it is the changes happened. He's got what he wanted and he's kind of walked. The other way of looking at it is, well, because these things are never black and white. And I know he was very frustrated with the fact that for the best part of 4 months, because he did say this in the press conference as well, that, you know, the club effectively sat on their hands. His argument has been, well, there should have been movement on this weeks ahead of when there actually was. And I think that particular kind of delaying, if you like, and uncertainty around what was going to happen and what road the club wanted to go down, I think did sow a little seed of doubt in him as to whether the club's hierarchy really understood what needed to happen. One of the great ironies here, I think, is that they chose a model which is quite British in terms of footballing operational structure. They chose not to go down the traditional European model of appointing a sporting director who is an all-powerful individual who has absolute autonomy over all of the sporting elements outside a club.
Which was the original plan, Scott. The original blueprint was it was going to be a sporting director. So there was a late change even in that from Argo.
Yeah, and I think that is part of the lingering frustration that he definitely did have. It looks from the outside as if the structure that's in place now and was put in place benefits Miron and suits him, and it does in a way because of how hands-on he likes to be and how involved that he is. I think there's a real benefit, I think, to the European model, the road that they didn't go down, I think, in terms of the stability for clubs longer term, because in a scenario like this one, the advantage to that European model is that if a coach goes, then you have a profile and a culture in place inside a club that remains the same, even if a coach leaves unexpectedly. Whereas at the moment, you have this situation where part of the anxiety is quite simply, okay, do we stick culturally and tactically with the road we thought we were going down under Miron, or is everything going to get ripped up here again and we completely go in a different direction with whoever the new coach appointed is? Whereas those things don't change if you stick with the European model. You know, it's a new face who fundamentally will play the same game, but maybe with some tweaks. There's now the decision not only about who do you appoint now, which is a big one in itself, but what road do you go down tactically and culturally? And that's a decision. I think that second question has to be answered quite quickly, because that predetermines all of the decisions that are then made after that, not only who you appoint, but who you might want as part of your backroom staff as well. And it's very important to have as little disruption as possible. So I think you guys are right. I think if you can keep as many of the staff on board as possible, if they're willing to do that, and ambitious enough to make that step up, I think that could be a very, very good thing. I think ripping everything up and starting again is potentially really dangerous here, unless you get a bit of luck and you make a really good appointment and you hit the ground running, which could happen. But it'll take a few days to digest this and just let some of the heat go out of it before some smart and hopefully rational decisions, I think, can be made inside the club. I think the passions need to cool a little bit.
We are a risk-taking club, and I'm sure that there will be one or two risks taken over the coming weeks. Let's change tact a little bit. Come to you boys at the bottom on this one, Graham and James. You can both have a go at this. Penny for the board's thoughts, a penny in particular for Simon Hallett's thoughts of all this, because we know obviously that things have been rough the last 2 years since we achieved promotion to the Championship. It's not been as smooth and enjoyable ride as we all would have liked. The first 5 months were pretty good, and then it snowballed really from there. And we've almost never picked the baton up again, have we, of the club we were before promotion to the Championship. Where do you stand with them on this? Because I went to bed last night fairly angry at anybody who was in my line of sight, let alone board of directors. But I've woken up this morning feeling genuine empathy towards Simon Hallett and the board on this, because as they mentioned in the statement, and I'll just quote this, that despite regular communication since the end of the season and no mention of any issues, Miron has now made it clear after extended periods away from his family, the opportunity provides him the chance to be closer to home after 4 years. of which nobody can take away from him that is an important thing. Family life is very important in everyone's decision making. They then go on to say, we are frustrated by the decision, having implemented clear structures, processes, and personal aid to aid Miron and his coaching staff as we look to return to the Sky Bet Championship at the earliest opportunity. Not only that, the club have also moved quickly to bring in new signings and received repeated verbal promises from Miron that he was committed and would do everything he could to help us bounce back. Now, the reason I say about the sympathy towards the board is, of course, this is not the first time that this particular board of directors have had a manager walk out thinking they're going to a better opportunity. Obviously, Ryan Lowe was the first to do it under this regime, and then when they thought they'd hit the jackpot with Steven Schumacher, he did exactly the same. How do you think Simon's feeling with all these millions he's pumped in, and repeatedly now the managers keep leaving at the first opportunity, it seems?
I think he'll be devastated. He was particularly hurt in the manner that Shuey left, because he spoke to him only a few weeks before he did and said, let me know about your intentions if you have any, and he didn't. And it's almost repeat. They gave Miron everything he asked for, the framework, the setup, everything, players in advance, everything, ticked every box that he wanted ticked. Some questions over the structure of sporting director, head of football operations, but apart from that, he will be devastated. He will feel you sign a contract. He comes from a contractual world where contracts in business mean something. And yes, he accepts that there will be a compensation element. He covered himself there, but overridingly, given the efforts they made to support him in the last 2-3 weeks, he will be devastated. And I do worry, it's a personal worry, that this will accelerate his desire to share the guardianship, or eventually change the guardianship of the club and enhance the move towards a new owner. I mean, I think he's 70 shortly. You know, this would be a tremendous strain on him and Jane. Don't forget that Jane, his wife, is an equal partner in this. This will hit them hard. It will hit the staff, the players, everybody hard, because genuinely there was, despite initial reservations, Miron, through his charismatic personality, really did have the ability to engender a spirit, a belief, a desire that few managers can actually do. And we signed up to it. We signed up to Shuey and what he was, and he blew us out of the water, and now the same's happened again. I think the key is don't fall in love with your managers or head coaches. Just take it that sometime they're going to go and enjoy the ride. And I think that's how I, on reflection, feel. But I really do feel for Simon and Jane in particular that don't forget, he said it was a measured risk to appoint Miron when Shu is sort of in the frame at the time. And the flack he took for doing it, even on this pod at the time, we remember it when Fabrizio Romano did that tweet. I mean, it seems as though he's the man. Is he connected to his agents or something? Because he gets all the stories.
Yeah. How it tends to work essentially is that a lot of agents will get in touch with Fabrizio and essentially feed him information.
Yeah,
and often that information is kind of, just part of hurrying deals along. Some of the information equally is not always accurate and is about trying to get deals done that are nowhere near being done. So some of it is misleading as well. But most of it is kind of fed directly to him, and of course he's paid essentially to tweet a lot of this news out. So it's not all freelance journalism of the highest quality. Unfortunately, there's a
He does have a good strike record, though, to be fair. It seems
he does,
anyway.
yeah. He does, yeah. He has a good in at most of the big agencies across Europe, and he is the go-to individual on social media for most of those agencies because of the pool that he's got. So there's a mutually beneficial benefit for obviously him personally, financially, but obviously for those agencies because they get it out to the biggest audience as quick as possible as well. So yeah, it's a tricky relationship, and I think a lot of people are turning against Fabrizio for a whole host of reasons now.
He's got a fairly better strike rate than some of our in the know journalists who shall not be named on this podcast. James, I mean, Scott was alluding to there the very British football operation structure we've now taken on. Do you think that with Muslich now deciding to leave, and of course he will have had a say-so in what sort of structure was going to go on behind him, do you think there's still a chance Argyle may well now go back looking for a sporting director to work above David Fox, who's the new head of football operations, or do you think they're now just going to stick with what they've gone with? James, unmute.
With a cash injection, you think that it's possible, but with the consultants that they've got working in the background, I would imagine they would probably keep with the path they've chosen, which is a kind of managed ascendancy for David Fox to sort of learn the ropes with support and then take on that role. Obviously, the I think widely accepted that the money that was being offered around for sporting directors for this role was far shy of what sporting directors at the level that we would be looking for want. So that comes straight out of the playing budget, and any budget to go out there and choose a man or lure a manager that's currently in work if we go down that path, or staff. So I don't think there's too much chance of us looking for a sporting director, something that's taken us 5 months to do, not done successfully, and now do that alongside the search for a new head coach again. So yeah, I don't think that's necessarily what's going to happen. Obviously, with Miron's role within the sporting director football operation level we've obviously spoken about, but I just saw a comment pop up which is quite timely, that obviously Tom Randall took a large part of that extra weight from us not having a sporting director, and in a traditional sense. I think it's very interesting to see people talking about the backroom staff. I feel like he might be the most interesting sort of participant to see what his move is, because was he a Miron man or was he a club hire? Because obviously we know that he worked with Muslich previously, but also if Miron staff was to leave, would that include Tom Randall or not? I get the gut feeling that it was kind of incidental and a happy coincidence that he'd worked with Muslich before, which means that we hopefully retain our head of recruitment during the recruitment window, which would be quite useful. So that would obviously limit some damage, and would the fact that Fox and Randall together would be remaining would obviously add some continuity. It's then about what style of football we decide to go down and the quality of that hire, which I assume we'll get onto later in the pod in the second half. I feel personally like one of the things that I said about that I felt regretful about Muslich leaving wasn't necessarily himself. It was the structure that had been implemented and looked so fit and proper to sort of launch a challenge this season. The other thing that sort of annoys or rankles is that while the football wasn't great at the beginning, it did improve over time, and we were starting to look like a team that we could start to see what a good Muslich team in League One or what in the Championship could look like near the end. It was a hell of a process to get there, and possibly many would argue too slow, and that's eventually what cost us and why we couldn't get it over the line. But the prevailing wind in football is direct attacking football. You've seen Pep-style teams being constantly overhauled by aggressive, high-pressing, direct teams. And I feel like that's the whether we stumbled upon that blueprint or we did it by design, we found that we could play in the Championship and punch above our weight with that style of football. So I do think we need to now be pragmatic and look for a coach that continues, perhaps not the exact same methods of Muslich ball and hopefully a little bit easier on the eye, but something that's direct, something that's sort of in this new mode, so that we can, if we do get back to the Championship, challenge again from that point of view, rather than go back to flip-flop back to a possession-based team.
Scott, I don't want to keep you too long, and we've got obviously a lot of questions to come about what comes in the future, and that may not be your forte. So I'll throw a couple more questions your way, and then I'll let you go and enjoy the rest of your Thursday evening. The question on screen there from Tyler, and James sort of intimated it there, about the fact that Muslich obviously stated that we didn't have a recruitment setup and things. And when we appointed Tom Randall on a permanent deal, it was said by the chief executive, Andrew Parkinson, that he'd been working on an interim basis for a short period, I think was the term the club used. Is there such a thing as coincidences in football operational structures, that it just happened to be that Tom Randall was his chief scout at Cercle Bruges, and now all of a sudden, boom, he's our head of recruitment?
Well, my understanding is that was very much a club appointment and not necessarily a name that had been thrown into the mix by Miron. I mean, obviously, when you're having conversations about who that individual might be, that then becomes interesting, that it is somebody that you know. I think the fact there was obviously an external consultancy working with the club as well to define what this new football and operational structure was going to be, I think is a bit problematic. I always felt that was a bit worrying, because I don't think the big questions that the club had to answer needed the input of an external consultancy, particularly. I think the footballing side of things, those questions are kind of obvious. We need these positions kind of filled that we don't have for us to be operationally effective. You don't need consultants to kind of to tell you that. They can maybe help you find the individuals, but they can't really define that structure for you. So that part of it was all very odd to me. I don't think Miron was 100% sold on Tom, if I'm honest. He knows Tom, they get on. They went together at Cercle for a particularly long time. Tom's got quite an interesting CV. He left a really quite interesting job in the MLS to kind of come back to England and effectively work freelance for Argyle for a little while before, as part of these conversations, obviously somebody, and I don't know whose idea it was, but somebody said, would you maybe be interested in effectively being the sporting director, but with less of the autonomy than you would get under the European model? Because with the British model, a lot of the sporting decisions are spread over 2, sometimes even 3 roles. There's a lot of crossover, whereas with the European model, a sporting director has absolute say on everything from the culture inside the club to the playing style tactically, to who the coach is and who the players coming in and out are, and the CEO and the president and the corporate body, if you like, deal effectively with the money, and sign things off in that sense. Whereas with the British model, all of that there's a lot more overlapping going on. So I think Miron was mostly happy with the structure and the appointments to be made. He wasn't unhappy. It's just, life comes at you fast sometimes, and particularly so in something as kind of unreal as football. It's not the real world. It's a bubble of its own. And sometimes the unexpected happens. So all managers at all levels are always open to talking to people, even if they're happy at clubs. Of course, you never hear stories generally in the press when coaches turn down offers really to kind of go somewhere because they're happy with somewhere. It's usually when they're unhappy that some heat is generated in the media for kind of their own ends. I think this option has come up very suddenly, and a very sudden decision has been made about it. And I think we've already given quite a lot of examples as to why this is a very enticing move for him. And like I was saying at the beginning, I think all of us would have made exactly the same choice. But I would reassure Argyle fans that I genuinely don't believe, knowing him the way that I do, that there was a deliberate instruction to engineer my exit. From Miron at all. Those things do happen with unhappy managers, of course, but quite often what you find with that is that those scenarios have a much longer and more public side to them in a way that this didn't. I know a lot of people felt that those two press conferences towards the end of the season were in that vein, but I don't think they were at all. I think that was a manager who was really keen to get in place what he needed. Ultimately did get it, even if it wasn't 100% to his liking. And then this offer comes along, and you have to decide. Like I was saying, managers leave clubs literally overnight. Sometimes, this is very similar to that, and that's how quickly a decision kind of needs to be made as well. Often these things pivot on tiny details as well. I mean, I know there's a lot of positive selling points from Schalke's perspective here that are very understandable without knowing them well as a club. But sometimes these things come down simply to, your wife and your children actually saying to you, yeah, we want you to do this, Dad. They might have their own professional misgivings about, I'm not sure Schalke are massive, but I'm not entirely 100% sold on the project, really, but it just kind of fits most things. The family go, no, this kind of has to happen. These things are big factors as well, and big pools for people. And that obviously was something that had been talked about. It's not a coincidence, obviously, that Miron's been back home for a few weeks now with the family. So these things will have been talked about as well, and I suspect there was a conversation along the lines of, well, at some point when an opportunity comes to be closer to home, whoever that is, then you take it. Football very rarely works out in a kind of tidy way, unfortunately. But there's certainly the narrative that a lot of people have been running with over the last 24 hours, that it's been engineered and that it was all manipulated, isn't really true. It's been quite transparent, I think, really. And all of the things going on behind the scenes have really been very normal things that happen every day in football. So there's been a lot of questions around his honour and his integrity, of course, and there will continue to be. But my own personal and my professional view on it is that I don't think this falls into the camp of there being a snake in the nest, really, at all. I know it feels like that. But this isn't one of those scenarios, and I know he wishes the club well. Some people today have taken a bit of offence, I think, at the fact that obviously he's dropped his connection with all of the club's socials as well. But that again, that's just part of something that happens in these situations, and often actually is something that a player or a coach's agency will do on their behalf as well.
That was what I was going to come on to, Scott, with your last question. Obviously, it's only been 4 months. Feels like 4 years with everything that's gone on in that 4 months. It's not been short of news stories and high moments and low moments. Let's be real about that. How's Miron Muslich going to reflect on his brief stay in Devon, do you think, when the dust has settled and when he's got a bit of free time during the international breaks in Germany? How do you think he'll look back on his time at Home Park?
Well, I know he's enjoyed it. He's enjoyed it immensely. I think he's still disappointed, obviously, with the way the season ended, and up until the moment where it was actually confirmed, I know that he absolutely 100% still had faith that it was possible to get it over the line. And I think when he says we just ran out of time is a very good way of putting it. I think probably another month maybe might have been enough just to kind of do it. And I think the conversations would be very different then. I think the decision in that scenario where you maintain your championship status and Schalke still come along and trigger your release clause, now that then becomes an even more difficult situation. It's still a very enticing move, but it's a different thing that you're weighing up. League One football and all of the financial infrastructure elements there to the Bundesliga too. So I think that would have been a much more agonising choice in his situation.
Scott, it's been great having you on. Obviously, this isn't the first podcast with us you've been on. You obviously came on when we appointed Muslich. I know you've done a couple of the other Argyle podcasts, and you did a bit of work with Chris Errington, I believe, as well, whilst Miron was in town. It's been great learning from you about Miron Muslich. I'm sure you'll follow his career closely again in Schalke. Hopefully you'll be able to catch up with Miron again in the future. So thank you for giving us 50 minutes of your time tonight. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully you'll keep an eye out on Argyle's results in the future when you're flicking through the games.
Absolutely will. I'll still be down at some point. I was talking to Chris just a few days ago, actually, before he went away on holiday, and that was one of the things we were talking about. Me coming down at some point during the course of the kind of coming season to a game, which I think I'd still like to do anyway. But yeah, I wish Argyle well, and maybe our paths will cross again in the future when there's another Belgian connection of some kind on Argyle's doorstep.
Who knows? Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Scott Coyne, Belgian football journalist. James, you're going to have to shift over Graham a little bit to the side as well. There we go. That's our new setup for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so with Scott Coyne, who was a fantastic guest, I think, over the course of a number of podcasts. As I said, not just with ourselves, with some of the other Argyle-based podcasts as well, learning about Miron Muslich. Gents, we've got you guys for about another 10, 12 minutes. I'm sure we can keep Sam and John waiting a little bit backstage, get them warmed up, ready to come on for the second half of the show. All eyes now turn to what's next. And we're back at this stage of the podcast again. We know what the process is from here. What does lay ahead for Simon Hallett and Andrew Parkinson? Obviously, Graham, you've alluded to the fact that, as far as you know, there was a meeting today. I'd have been somewhat shocked if there wasn't. I can imagine it was a very somber beginning to the meeting. We hear in the past that there are always processes and lists that are drawn up from the moment we appoint a head coach to find a replacement. Before I ask you what you want and who you want from the next man, we have well over 2,500 people joining us already tonight. The People's Champion, I think he was the People's Champion for a second year in a row, Sam Down, will be joining us along with John Alsop for the final hour of the show tonight in a bit. So while you are watching, do get all your suggestions into the comments, and we'll show as many as we can over the next hour as to who you want to be the next Argyle head coach. Graham, James, what do you want from the new head coach? Who do you want to be head coach?
I think we've got a real problem because when Miron was appointed, there was an intimation they wanted a change of style. So we've gone down the change of style, which, to be fair, throughout the season, more and more teams adopted. Fewer and fewer played out the back, more and more hit it long, played the second ball, more and more took a long throw. I mean, barely a game goes by without a long throw. So all the facets that Miron and his team put in place point towards that way of playing. But we have a couple of misfits in that. Baidu and Al Hajj possibly don't fit into that style. So I think the first thing the board are going to do is, what do they want to do in terms of continuity? Do they want to go along the same lines? And if that is the case, I actually would be a strong advocate of keeping, if Adin and Eddie are staying, build upon that. We've got David Fox, we've got Joe Edwards, we've got Nance, we've got a real Argyle core that might work. The problem is hardly anybody knows anything about Eddie and Adin, because I think they did one interview between them in the 4 months or 5 months. So everyone goes, oh my God. But Adin has had more time as assistant manager than Shuey had when Shuey stepped into the shoes. Sorry. So they've got to make that decision. So, but that will depend whether Miron wants to take them or not. If they go, then we've really got a difficult decision, bearing in mind the number of clubs that still haven't appointed managers or head coaches. I think is it 7 or 8? And we're pretty way down that pecking order in terms of attractiveness. We're not in the Championship. We're in transition, shall we say. So difficult decisions for the board. And I just hope, we all hope they make the right one. But this, perhaps, I said on Passotti, it's a watershed moment. And I really do feel this is a watershed moment, because we still have the potential of investors coming on board. We are cash rich for the first time in recent memory. We do have the ability to get players in and do well in League One. But we've got this decision of the head coach is perhaps the most important in recent times, I feel, because it will set the process for the next couple of years or more. Just as an aside, and I think James alluded to it, the external consultants, I don't know whether they're going to have any involvement in the recruitment of the head coach. I do feel uncomfortable because they seem to have, I think one of them's seconded to Derby for the transfer window. So I just see conflicts of interest, Chinese walls and all that. I just feel uncomfortable that sits well with what the decisions we're going to make. It'd be easy to say I trust the board to make the right decision, but no fan's going to say that. No fan's going to say that. They won't know whether they've made the right decision until the season transpires. I just hope and pray they do, and that it's one that we can build upon and give continuity and stability, because those are the two words that keep coming back to me at the moment, which is what we haven't got.
James, if you were one of these consultants advising the board on some of our football decisions at the moment, what's the name you would throw at them and hope it sticks?
Well, just rewinding this a second, like the attributes. I'm more interested in the attributes of the candidates we interview rather than the exact names of who we go for. I think, as I alluded to earlier, while there's no harm in changing style as such, because I feel when the loanees went back and the squad is kind of a mix of all the different styles of football that we've played with for the last couple of years, it's kind of slight blank slate, and we've got kind of different pegs and different holes. But as I said earlier, I'm really of the opinion that going back, if we're gonna set a style that's gonna set for a couple of years, and hopefully we match, and there was an interesting tweet the other day about what your expectations were for the season. Literally, my expectation is for us to perform in line with our budget, and seeing we'll have one of the biggest budgets in the in League One. Supposedly, we should be playing at the top of not the top of League One, but in the top portion of League One. We should give ourselves a good chance of getting something out of the season, even if it's by the playoffs. We should be thinking of the next couple of years. So are we going to go for another sort of possession-based style and then go up to the Championship, hopefully in the next couple of years, and then find ourselves being woefully played off the park by every team, and then we come back down again? Or are we going to come and look at what the prevailing sort of style of football is that's getting results in the Premier League and in Europe? And we've seen it over and over again this season, where direct football is the prevailing style. So yeah, I want to see us continue the project in that way. Again, perhaps not in exactly the same way as Muslich, and hopefully in a more attractive way. But I want to see us continue this, to continue like this. And if we lose another manager, can still continue is what we're supposed to be doing. It's what a sporting director would have us doing. So any name we get in, I would like it to be a name that or a style of football that suits, that enables us to continue into the Championship once again, and hopefully be better off than we have been. I also think I would love us to go out and get someone who has their own backroom staff or preferred assembly of coaches, at least one quality assistant. If we don't keep our own, one quality assistant, the set piece coach, and the fitness coach elements. I really don't want to see us getting into a sort of Foster or Rooney situation where we're it's going to take us weeks to get a head coach in, and we're then going to spend weeks getting a fitness coach in. And how's that going to impact on pre-season? We need to hit the ground running. We're already going to be tight on time to get this sorted out and implement that style. So Tom Randall can be looking for players capable of playing physical, direct football, and then we can hopefully get a manager with a staff. We've got plenty of compensation money, so go out there and choose someone who fits the bill, and whatever the league that's in, whether we look to Europe or closer to home, but get the coaches, because that was, to me, the most appealing thing about, I said it, keep repeating myself, but it's the most appealing thing I thought about the Muslich setup, which we had quality coaches, a quality staff. We had a set piece coach for how long did it take us to get a set piece coach? So yeah, getting those ducks in a row again as quickly as possible is what I want to see us go out there and get. The name to me is less important, because it's about those attributes.
I agree. I'm still going to push you for a name.
I mean, although obviously last season was a complete disaster, I thought Rob Edwards did well in that Premier League season. What happened at Luton feels inexplicable, given the riches that they had, given how well they acquitted themselves in the Premier League. I still a bit of a loss to how they performed so badly. So there's obviously question marks there, but that would be a name that I've obviously Ruben Sellers has the pedigree, I think, to be a great candidate. If I'm completely honest, I couldn't speak to the sort of exact attributes of his footballing philosophy to whether it meshes with what I just said, but the caliber of candidate is good. But if we're assembling a physical team and to play a physical style of football, Phil, if you're going to push me for a name, Rob Edwards would be on my list.
Question for you both then to sign off before we bring Sam, John, and Adam in for the final hour. Ninja Matt asks, it's aimed at you, Graham, but I don't know whether James, you can shed any light on this. It's a age-old question. Normally at the fans forum, it's all about the corners. On our lengthy podcast, it's all about investment. It's gone very quiet. I mean, not that it was ever a high talking point or rumor mill anyway, but how's this all going to play out to the potential new investor, and slowing things down or speeding things up, do we think?
I think it depends whether the investors are currently tied up with another club. And that is a distinct possibility as to why things haven't progressed as fast as they might do, because if they are going to take over ownership of the club, as Simon has explained, you can't have two ownership interests in two English clubs, Premiership and Championship. That may be an explanation as to why things have suddenly slowed. And there are clubs that have been trying to sell, the directors are trying to sell their shares and been unable to for a whole variety of reasons. So that is a possibility. I'm not saying I know, but it does, the timelines and the timings of the statements does tie in with that particular scenario. I know Simon is frustrated. That was his actual words to me, that he can't unlock it at the moment. And I don't know why. I'm only surmising.
Fingers crossed that gets done quickly, because it would be a great help towards our quest to the championship. Fingers crossed, as James, I think it was you alluded to it earlier, we don't do things very quickly at Plymouth Argyle, it seems, when it comes to recruitment. We follow our structures, we follow our processes. Let's hope that we're all back on this channel again in a week to 10 days. Who knows, if the Cardinals could find a new pope in 4 ballots, let's hope we can do something similar at Home Park. James and Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A good 65 minutes from the pair of you. Go rest up. We'll get you off the bench again when we'll get some more minutes into your legs ahead of next season when we appoint a new manager. So James and Graham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will bring in place of James and Graham, we will bring in John and Sam Down is with us. Adam is backstage as well, but he's not got his camera. There he is. There he is. So we're all ready to go. It's just like old times. The big four are in. We've had James and Graham warming everybody up, and now these three are going to bore us to tears for the next hour. So let's see what they've got. John, I'm going to start with you because a comment came up earlier and I thought I'd start it and I hadn't. The irony that Miron Muslich has managed to find a job abroad and Danny Roll is still at Sheffield Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know, when you're talking about a club that plays in front of 60,000 people, is one of the biggest in Europe, has a rich pedigree, and is surely only a matter of time from, you know, getting back into the top flight in their country where they belong, that play in blue and white, I believe. Then yeah, I don't see why you would leave Sheffield Wednesday, to be honest. But you know, Schalke are a big club as well, and you know, I don't begrudge Miron going there. Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? Royal looked like he was going to Southampton. That was sort of rumoured on and off for most of the season. I think it was kind of being discussed as kind of a done deal, right? In recent weeks, they seem to have balked at the compensation, if you believe reporting, and they've ended up with Will Still. And time will tell how he will do. I have to say, I'm not especially optimistic, but Sam will definitely disagree because he will be very aroused by his footballing trajectory, which is exactly the sort of thing that Sam likes. So we'll see. I think that might possibly be the subject of a bet between me and Sam when the new season rolls around. I don't tend to do so well in these bets, actually, regrettably. So maybe Sam will come out on top again. But I feel like I might have a little wager against still being imposed. If you'll pardon the pun.
It's almost like I base mine on evidence and you base yours on whatever reactionary anti-hits to take your brain comes up with, isn't it? It's funny that.
Something along those lines, although I would like to cast back to when you messaged to say you were so wrong about Foster and Rooney, but and that means that you're probably wrong about Muslich as well. He's terrible. We need to get rid of him, or words, something to that effect.
I don't think it was ever quite that, but yeah, I would, yeah, you made that meme, didn't you? Of it's like
Steve Harvey,
yeah,
the American game show host, yeah,
and it's Sam realizing Muslich is being poached, and then it's with a dismayed face Sam realizing this means Muslich is good, and that process seems to have happened, yeah.
Adam, I'll come to you because I suspect we're going to have an almighty sound down monologue coming, which will delight the Sam's Corner fans that are watching. We have over 3,000 people, gents, joining us tonight. We are at 68 minutes into the program. Adam, what have you made of the last 24 hours? What have you made of the last week, really? Signing 2 players, Muslich saying how delighted he is to have them, and both players saying how delighted they are with Muslich, and a week later, and us 4 are sat here when we're supposed to be enjoying our post-season break.
Yeah, that was good while it lasted. I'm usually delighted to see your smiling faces on most of my Sunday evenings, and then some occasional midweek as well. I'm less happy today, as I imagine we all are, to be fair, and I assure you it's nothing personal. Do you know what? I went to bed in a blind rage yesterday with everyone involved, to be honest. That includes Muslich for what he's done. That includes the club for in many ways allowing it to happen. I'm not quite as angry anymore, perhaps, but I'm certainly still annoyed by how this has happened, if not, the act in itself. Because I was listening to the first hour, and Scott, who came on, and I think we've all grown to know and respect over the last 4 months, was making the point that, yeah, none of us would turn down Schalke, and I don't think I would either, to be honest. And I'm an Argyle fan, so given an opportunity like that, I think it's impossible to turn down. I get why he's done it. What I don't like is the way that he's gone about it, because at the end of the day, we're having the discussion about whether he's looking to engineer his exit, and to be honest with you, I disagree with the prevailing wisdom of the first hour, because I think he probably was. I think that is what was happening, and I think it would be naive of me to assume that Schalke's interest has only developed in the last 48 hours or something like that, because there's no doubt in my mind, as I think has been mentioned, that his agent would have been in touch, not just with one club, but with many, to try and engineer a move, which, hey, is in the agency's best interest. So of course they would be. But Muslich has done nothing to quell that. He's not, no, actually, I'm quite happy here. I'm not going to accept a move. And by all accounts, he didn't move to Hull because they weren't willing to meet the release fee. He may not have got the offer initially at Schalke, but if he didn't, I've no doubt that someone else would have come in and go, oh, that looks like a good opportunity as well. It stinks a bit. I bought in, perhaps naively, to the way that he was telling us how much he loved the club, and I don't think he loves it quite nearly as much as he claims he did, because of the way that this has been engineered. And I say all of that knowing for a fact that I would have made the same decisions he did. And Schalke, former Champions League semi-finalists, they're in the knockout stage of the Champions League 6 years ago. This is a massive, massive club, and I can totally understand why he'd want to go there. But don't go there after 3 weeks of trying to play fans in your favour, trying to get the board on side, and then make your move. I think that's a little bit low, and it leaves a sour taste for sure. On the other hand, I can't absolve the board of any criticism. I know that there's a lot of sympathy for them here, and with fair reason, because I do agree for the last 3 weeks, the stuff they've done, the stuff they've put in place for what they assumed would be a Muslich continuity, has been great. And we praised them in the last podcast here because they deserved it. They've made moves quickly. They've been decisive, as exactly how we wanted them to be. And, we're now in this situation. But they didn't need to get themselves in this situation. They knew there was a clause in Miron Muslich's contract that he could leave at any time if it was met, because they put it there. They knew that this could happen as soon as he signed that contract in January, and as soon as we didn't stay up. And to just assume that wouldn't be met when we knew that this sort of thing had happened before with Low and Schumacher, I think is incredibly naive, actually, for the top, and borderline stupid in a lot of ways, in a line of seriously poor decisions. Because I'm going to say now, the appointment of Miron Muslich was a failure. I'll put that out there, because that's not to say that he was a bad manager. Of course he wasn't. He did a lot better than I think many expected. But when we were in that recruitment process in January, what we really wanted to see was a manager who'd do his best to keep us up, and even if he couldn't, we'd go into League One with somebody who'd fought, and we were able to hit the ground running with them in the next season. That's not happened. That's not happened because we've put a clause in his contract that has allowed him to leave, and according to some reports, accepted an offer below that clause to also allow him to leave. It's not been managed well in any situation. And as far as I'm concerned, that's 3 failed appointments in a row. With Foster, with Rooney, with Muslich. There was an option in January that I'm sure Sam is going to mention, and I'll leave it to him, that we would have had someone coming back into League One who I think would be more than happy to manage us in League One. And there were other options who perhaps wouldn't have requested that clause to be in the contract had they gone down. Nobody, quite honestly, comes out of this smelling of roses. I think the board have been incredibly silly to just assume that everything's going to be fine and just say, oh, well, no one's going to meet that clause, or if someone meets it, he's clearly not going to leave, because, hello, he has. And I think Muslich has handled himself really poorly in the way that he's engineered this exit as well, which, to be honest, I've no doubt that realistically he has. I'll stop my own monologue now because we've got plenty of this to come. But it's an awful situation. It's something that 48 hours ago, obviously, I couldn't foresee, but I suspect some in the back room kind of knew was coming. And yeah, it's a little bit of a mess. It's a little bit of a mess.
Sam, let's come to you. Let's go to Anthony Joseph of Sky Sports first, who provided an update a little while ago. The update came through. I'm sure most of you will have seen it by now. The update came through saying that they're close to agreeing terms with Plymouth Argyle boss Miron Muslich. He's been offered a 2-year deal, including an exit clause. A £1 million fee was agreed, and Schalke have also offered Plymouth Argyle a special bonus to play a friendly in the future, which has yet to be accepted. I would hope that friendly is never accepted. Sam Down, give the people what they want. What's your thoughts on Miron Muslich's untimely departure to go to the former European Cup winners?
Back here again, aren't we?
Adjudication. Can we call his departure untimely?
And can we call
Given that he's
Schalke
left-
former European Cup winners?
They did win the 1995-1996 UEFA Cup.
I'm not sure you can call an
Not the
appointment.
European Cup, is it?
I'm not sure you can. Yeah, first of all, Adam is right. Secondly,
Thank you.
I don't think you can call a departure before the end of the prior domestic season untimely. Untimely departure is like when you're top at Christmas. It's not in May of the
I would say it's untimely, given we're trying to get ahead of the game in recruiting and getting ourselves set up for a quick return to the Championship. And going back to the original point, Sam, what's your thoughts on it? And a pointed question to you: how far has this decision set us back?
Yeah, as I was saying, back here again, aren't we? For the now 4th time in 18 months, we're here since the end of 2023. We are here discussing a managerial departure. We're making quite a habit of this, aren't we? It's quite remarkable, having from obviously appointing Ryan Lowe in summer 2019. We announced Schumacher on the day of Lowe's departure. So we went from summer 2019 to December 2023 without ever going through a recruitment process for a new manager. So we went 5.5 years without any kind of recruitment process. And now we've had 4 in the following 18 months of recruitment processes. So it's absolutely crazy, isn't it? What a bonkers ride we've been on, and not in a particularly good way, really. I think it does set us back enormously. It's my honest opinion. I think that Miron Muslich is whatever you think of his conduct, whatever you think of his style of football, the one thing that I've been fully won over to, that I don't think anyone can deny, is he is an extremely capable coach, without a shadow of a doubt. Clearly a very, very capable head coach, very good at his job.
You've never denied. Sam has famously never denied that, and no one could.
Well, I think I said you could not deny it now, is what I said. I never denied personally, never denied it. He did take a bit of time to win me over. I'm not going to deny that. But it's a real loss, not only because he is a talented asset, although that is obviously part of it. What also makes it more of a loss is the fact that we have built our entire bespoke club structure around Miron Muslich. Now, if I'm going to repeat what I said in the space, if any of you have heard this approximate formulation of words before, I apologise. Most clubs have head coach, head of recruitment, sporting director / director of football, whatever you want to call them. We have, due to Muslich and due to him sort of threatening to leave, dangling his rod for the club to give them everything they want at the end of the season, made a very bespoke setup whereby we're having a head coach.
Hang on a minute, without going full Phoenix Knights doorman here, I beg your pardon.
What do you mean, you beg my pardon?
Dangling his what?
Dangling his rod.
You carry on.
Listen,
yeah, I will. Yeah, thank you for that intervention. We now have a set up whereby it's not just the head coach, head of recruitment and sporting director. We have a head coach. We have a head of recruitment who, as per Scott's earlier explanation, was given many of the functioning roles of a director of football. We have a head of football operations who seemingly is in probably a relatively an administrative role, David Fox, learning on the job. And we have, of course, the representative from Bromby and Partner, who has been a sporting director in the past and is currently assisting the club in that capacity. So we have a real kind of hodgepodge setup, which is very different to how most clubs at League One or Championship level will have their club structure. And as I said on the podcast a week ago, that setup would have been fine if Miron Muslich stayed, because it was around the head coach giving him lots of autonomy. And it was obviously like a head of recruitment who was taking on more roles than a head of recruitment normally would. It was a head of football operations learning on the job, and it was a consultant who's sort of overseeing it and presumably giving words of advice, etc. That's all now up the Swanee, because that relied on having a manager or a head coach who had that pretty much total control of strategic direction to mould the club in his image. And you know what? I get why the club are peed off. I really do. And I'm not just saying that to kind of butter it up for criticism. I do genuinely get it, because they've changed their entire structure around giving Miron Muslich what he wants. Miron Muslich is apparently, by all accounts, giving them full assurances that he was going to continue in the job and that he wanted this, that, and the other. And we've pretty much got out and bent over backwards. You know, whatever you think about the failings up to now, we've pretty much got out and bent over backwards to give him what he's looking for. And we've done that, okay? And he's then, the next immediate offer he's got said, there are, see you later, out the door. So I get why the club are annoyed in that respect. I'm going to agree with Adam. I think thank you very much, by the way, to Scott, if you're still watching the Coming On. I appreciate what you've said, and I absolutely take great value in a lot of it. I probably would side more with Adam. I do agree that he was manipulating an exit. I think I sort of said that was happening or potentially happening quite a while ago. I was maybe very briefly won over when we had that glut of news of the retained list and Randall coming in and all the rest of it in the Austria tour. And we thought, oh, he's very clearly given his assurances to the board that he's staying. And you know what? I was half right. He had given those assurances to the board. So I was half right. The half wrong is that he clearly had no intention of following through on them. So he was clearly touting himself around for jobs. The initial Fabrizio Romano tweet about 26 hours ago now that sparked all this chaos said Hanover, Cologne and Hull City were keen, but didn't happen. So that to me said, you don't have that many clubs interested in the manager unless that manager is putting himself about. And for all the commitment he gave, that announcement of Randall and Fox, etc., that could very easily have come with the announcement of a new extended contract for Miron Muslich. We could still have had a release clause, maybe a higher one, maybe about 1.5 million, 1.6 million, whatever. We could still have had a higher release clause, but still giving him one. The fact is now, he didn't sign that contract. He was touting himself around to other clubs, allegedly, and all this. I believe he was engineering the exit with 95, 96, 97% certainty. I won't say I'm 100% because I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but reading between the lines, I think he was maneuvering his exit. Do I blame him? Again, I'm probably repeating some of the stuff Adam said, so I'll brush over this fairly quickly. Do I blame him for taking the job in isolation? No, absolutely not. It's Schalke. They have 62,000 fans getting in the door every week. They're a massive club with the potential to go back up to the Bundesliga. And if they can clear their debts and get back promoted, no reason why they can't even compete at the top of the Bundesliga. So I don't, nobody in their right mind, unless they're ultra loyal, in isolation, would turn down Schalke and remain at Plymouth Argyle. But it's not just in isolation. It's the fact that I think he's perhaps represented himself falsely. It's the fact that he's, I'm going to say, maybe given a bit of a fake image of himself, like a Mr. Nice Guy image, and behind closed doors, he perhaps couldn't really give less of a hoot. Or maybe if he did give a hoot, he certainly doesn't give enough of a hoot compared to sort of feathering his own nest and advancing his own career. Is there any blame on the board? Yes, in as much as we've been ran quite poorly, the football side of it at least, for 18 months. And yes, whilst we have got our act together the last month or so, I very much strongly do think that, whilst I do think he's engineered his exit, there is perhaps going to be that always lingering bit of doubt in the back of my mind of, if we'd have done everything perfectly up to now, would he have still engineered his exit? Do we have ourselves to blame for that in some respect? And I think the answer is possibly. But as much as anything else, it is just to some extent our place in the food chain. It is. We are a much smaller club than Schalke 04. they're a club who have got recent, European history. They won the UEFA Cup. They've made the Champions League semi-final at one point. Ultimately, factoring all of that into the equation, I don't blame him in isolation. I blame him for the way he's conducted himself, and I think the false image he's tried to project himself for the sake of preserving his own reputation. That much I very much do agree on. And as much as I'm frustrated with some aspects of the club, I do think that they've done all they can, certainly in recent times. Now, clearly, the release clause hasn't been met in the sense that Schalke haven't just said, right, we're going to pay the clause, get it done and dusted, boom. Because otherwise there wouldn't be this ongoing negotiation going on. And a couple of people in the comments have alluded to the fact that the release clause hasn't been met. What's happened is that Argyle have given him permission to speak. Now, if he has then said, or if he has intimated to Argyle behind closed doors that he's just going to down tools and not work properly, then if that's what happened, then we've obviously given him permission to speak, and we're going to negotiate the fee later. And if we can't negotiate a fee, it's going to go to tribunal. Okay, that's, I think, really what we're probably looking at is going on here. So if that's the case, then hopefully we'll agree a fee. If not, it will go to tribunal. I think the offer of a friendly is a bit of a piss take, really, but there we have it. What else was I going to say? So we'll have to see how that goes. I think clearly he's not a very trustworthy individual, not as much of a trustworthy individual as he perhaps presented himself as, but at the same time, the club have been a bit naive, and it is where we are in the food chain. Where I perhaps don't agree with Adam, as much as I do place some particular blame on Muslich and slightly less so on the club hierarchy, is I don't really think that there was a way of avoiding a manager being poached. I think if any manager had come in, and even going against my own view here, even if Schumacher had come in and done the job Muslich had done, produced constantly lower mid-table form, and very nearly kept this up, Schumacher could still have been poached. And we know before he's already shown his willingness that he will leave for a better offer when he left for Stoke. So, I don't know, I'm rambling a bit here.
Sam, you said better offer.
Perceived better offer. So with all that in mind, I don't know, I've kind of rambled and not really come to a firm conclusion. I do think Muslich is an absolute chancer. I do equally think that the fact that how poorly the football side of the club has been for 18 months may have contributed to that decision. But at the same time, at the end of the day, if we removed both parts of that equation, if we removed an ambitious, power-hungry coach who wasn't sharking himself around for every job under the sun, and if we removed a slightly differing football hierarchy and every other piece of the equation stayed in place, could he still have been poached? Quite possibly, is my view. Quite possibly. So that's where I'm at with it. Maybe a little bit of blame on both sides, but ultimately just where we are on the food chain, and we need to start realising that, unfortunately. As to where we go next, do I think it will have an impact? Yes, absolutely, because of what I said at the start of my monologue. Partly the fact that he's just a very good coach, and also partly the fact that it's going to mean that we're on the back foot now in terms of the club setup, club structure. We're going to have to bring in a head coach who works in that structure, or failing that, we're just going to have to bring in a normal head coach and then appoint a sporting director to work over him. So there's a lot of work having to be done behind the scenes. We're already in the process of bringing players in amidst all this. It's a real shame that this is going on and that this is happening. Hopefully we'll agree a fee. And by the way, if it's true that Muslich had said, Schalke aren't agreeing the fee, and I'm just going to, walk out and let you negotiate a tribunal fee, then that makes him even more of a snake than we perhaps first thought he was. So my view on Muslich has hardened over the past 24 hours. I think when I was on the space, I was very much in the view of who can blame him for leaving Plymouth Argyle for Schalke. I still don't entirely disregard that, but having heard about the way he's conducted himself a bit the last 24 hours, I think he deserves his own share of criticism. So nobody comes out of this smelling of roses. I just hope that Argyle make the right appointment going forward. And I hope that we react to this quickly. Don't spend 2, 3, 4 blooming weeks dithering about interviewing billions of people. Let's just headhunt someone, get them in. And if the person we've headhunted turns us down, or if the person we've headhunted is not given permission to talk to us by their own club, we move on to the next one. It's that simple. I don't want to spend time on a lengthy process here. I want to just get somebody in. So that's where I'm at with this. I don't think it completely diminishes our chances of promotion, but it does vastly reduce them, and it vastly reduces the chances of getting in a good functioning squad in time for pre-season, which I think is a real shame. Miron Muslich, I grew to like him a lot more, and I still think I massively underrated him as a coach, and I'll hold my hands up to that. But I think as a person, and the way he can be a little bit sneaky in the way he presents himself, I'm probably going to stick to my original verdict on that one. I think I was probably right in the first place. That's my view. Very big few weeks coming, and that was probably my longest ever monologue on this pod. I'm available for follow-up questions if you wish.
And Sam Down will also be available for after-dinner speeches at a very reasonable flat fee moving forward. There's a lot to unpick from what Sam said. I don't know if anyone wants to challenge it in a second, but first of all, I'm going to give a shout out to Blanket on YouTube, who's given us a £2 super chat, which is crazy because we don't ever ask it, we don't ever seek it. I know there are some live streams around that you do get on social media that do seek these sorts of things. Just says a message for you, Sam. Can I just say I admire all the miles you do. I think
Thank you very much.
You know, Blanket may well be a Sam's Corner supporter, but thank you very much for the £2. That will go towards one of Aaron's new designs for a mug or something ahead of next season. So where do we go from here, John, Adam? What's the requirements? What are the, if you were to advise, if you, as said to James and Graham at the end of the first hour, if you were part of this consultancy firm who've been advising Argyle for a few months now, what sort of I don't know, job requirements would you put down or advise them to look for in the next head coach? Because it is a big decision.
I can take this one, if that's okay, and then I'm sure Adam will come in. For me, I think just an obvious choice. Obviously we've gone through the Championship era, and we've made 3 managerial appointments, all of which were a risk, right? Or like the riskier of a number of known options. We hired Ian Foster, who was, never really managed before at a serious level. We hired Wayne Rooney. We all know how that ended out. And then we hired Miron Muslich when everyone thought it was going to be Schumacher, who would have been the kind of obvious quote unquote safe candidate. And I think, as I identified early on, and Sam did not, Muslich had a very good coaching pedigree, and I think that was the right call. But it was still, it was still a risk, definitely a risk. So I can understand why our fans think that the board has kind of a penchant for risks, that they are always going to kind of try and be contrarian or overly clever. But under Hallett's tenure, we have appointed 2 other managers, and they both fitted a very different type of appointment. Schumacher was hired from being the assistant to Ryan Lowe, and I know that Sam feels strongly about the possibility that we could give the job to an assistant. Again, I'll let him talk on that in a little bit. Safe to say I don't necessarily agree with him, but that can be a debate that we can have momentarily. But I want to sort of cast back to the first appointment that we made in the Hallett era, which was Ryan Lowe, who at the time was, I think, the obvious candidate for the job, right? He was available, basically, had done a fantastic job at that level, had just got a team promoted, and was somebody who everyone looked at and thought, yeah, actually that makes a lot of sense. And it worked because, obviously it was the COVID season, it got curtailed, we went up on points per game, but we went up, and I think we probably would have gone up even more convincingly than we did on points per game if the season had been allowed to finish. I think we were just kind of hitting a good period of form and togetherness when COVID struck. And Lowe's obviously gone on to have a pretty good managerial career. So, and actually, if you look at our situation now, it's much more analogous to that situation than to when Lowe left or when we had to go and hire Foster, Rooney or Muslich. In the Championship, as much as I personally wish we had taken less of a risk on some of those appointments in hindsight, I can understand the club's mentality. In the Championship, we basically had to go out and hire managers who were likely to punch above their weight, who had proved that they could improve teams with a budget that was going to be less than the teams around them. That requires kind of a special person. And I understand why you might have looked at some of the sort of journeyman lower end Championship managers like your Paul Heckingbottoms or even Gary Rowett. And obviously he did a great job at Oxford in the end, and thought, for this club, maybe that's not quite what we need. We need somebody who is maybe going to fall spectacularly on their face, but maybe if it just kind of goes right, is somebody who can sort of be that person who can punch above a level rather than someone we know will meet a kind of consistent so-so level or whatever, but it might not be enough to keep us up with the budget that we have. That's not the position we're in now. We're in a position where we've gone down to a league where, for the first time in a long time, we're going to be one of the biggest fish, where I think we should deservedly be among the favourites for promotion, where we have money to spend, where I believe will be an attractive proposition for any number of managers who fancy, having a proper go at getting out of that league next year. And so I think that puts us in a position where, much like when we went down from League One to League Two, and we're going to be the biggest, one of the biggest, if not the biggest fish at that level, it puts us in a position where we could go out and look at the equivalents of what Ryan Lowe was to us at that point and say, yeah, okay, let's go and get them. So for me, it's that experience, I think, of the level, or at least someone who's proven that they, can take a team that is tipped to do well in a league, whatever that league may be, and actually kind of deliver on it. I don't think we necessarily need someone next year who's going to overperform budget massively. I think we need someone who can perform to budget. I think that's a different, I think that opens up a lot more options for us, basically. To me, the absolutely outstanding candidate is very clearly Ruben Sayers. I think it just seems perfect that he is out of work while we are looking for someone. I think he is quite a pragmatic manager who will fit the kind of current hodgepodge of a squad that we have and be able to get a tune out of it and take it in a sort of sensible direction. I think he's somebody who obviously did a fantastic job at Reading, a total basket case of a club, got them sort of onto the, to the cusp of, or even inside the playoff places, was poached by Hull, did exactly what he was hired to do at Hull, I think massively improved them defensively, if I'm not mistaken, and then was fired by their clown of an owner who doesn't seem to know what he's doing. He seems to be, the sort of manager who just seems to be crying out that this is a great fit for him at this moment in time. But if not, I think Rob Edwards is not a terrible shout. I think Luke Williams, I have some worries stylistically about him, but as someone who's managed in the Championship, and Richie Wellens is another one. And Joe is desperately trying to get me to say Michael Duff, who I would also be probably okay with. Obviously, he did a very good job at Barnsley at that level, at the top end of the league in the season that we went up. They didn't quite, but they did very, very well. It was obviously just a very high standard at the top end of that league that year, and they came very, very close to doing it in the playoff final against the greatest club on earth. So, there's also Richie Wellens I was about to mention. There's absolutely no reason I don't believe why we can't just go into a Leyton Orient and say, we've had our manager poached by a bigger fish. We're going to poach your manager now. He did a fantastic job to get them into the playoff final after, a season where they started pretty poorly, and I think they wouldn't have been among too many people's tip for a top 6 place. Maybe someone who's not a terribly fashionable manager, but I think someone who's proven actually he's done a pretty good job very quietly at quite a few clubs, and certainly last season, has shown that in this League One he knows how to build a team that play solid, but actually quite at times exciting football. So yeah, I guess just the sort of meta point here is I don't really buy this idea that we are in like an absolutely terrible position. I think obviously we're in a worse position than if Muslich had stayed. I was very, very excited about the prospect of him staying, really wanted to believe that it was happening. Seemed like, things were being put in place, as Sam has mentioned. I'm not going to sort of relitigate all of that. And this obviously does mean that we're going to have to bring someone else in and hire their own backroom staff potentially or whatever. Equally, though, I think we've already started to sign players. Clearly, the recruitment is in gear, and managers come into clubs in October, November kind of time and get teams promoted or massively improve them, and that's with no preseason. It can be done. I think him leaving in May, and I was sort of making a bit of a joke earlier when I said you can't really call this an untimely departure. It's obviously no particularly good timing for a move of this nature from our point of view. But if he's going to go, it's much better that he goes now than in mid-July or early August or even November or December. We have an opportunity now to get someone in who will have most of a whole summer if we act quickly, and Sellers is available. So I'm hoping that we can just do that and get it done. To sort of actually put some things in place. It's not ideal, but I actually think that's enough time. And I think given, how much of a big fish we have the potential to be at League One level next year, I don't see any reason why we can't just get that done and start moving towards it and hopefully put Muslich in the rearview mirror as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you didn't mention, hang on, Sam, just very quickly, you didn't mention former promotion winning manager Des Buckingham in your monologue there, John, which was a poor oversight by you, I believe.
Oh. Oh no. Anyway,
Stephen Cooper's been active in the comments tonight. Stephen, you're very welcome with your comments. I have actually starred some of your comments. I was coming to them later, but I'll come to this one now. Can you get polo shirts for the summer? it's a market out there. We will put it to Aaron when we're finished, whether or not he can get Sam Down's face put onto a polo shirt for the great masses of the city to buy. I'm sure it will go down.
We've got a
Go
couple
down
of quid
swimmingly.
extra for that as well now, after our super chat. Thanks, whoever that was. That's a couple of quid closer to Sam Down on a polo shirt. Thank you so much.
It is. Yes. You know, it does all go. It does all go to making sure that we can get Sam Down out to Marbella or Innsbruck or Puerto Banús, wherever it is we're going to end up going now in pre-season. Adam, Sam, with what John's described as the job description, what he wants from our next head coach, he's put forward Ruben Sayers as his number one choice. Who do you have at the top of your shortlist?
I'm going to give 3 names. I don't think
Sam, if you name the Malmo manager, I am going to have to do time, I'm afraid.
I'm going to give 3 names. I don't think anybody else is going to say, because I hear John's rationale that this is more suited to a manager who can just get, on standard, as opposed to a manager who can, I'm rambling myself into oblivion. Let me start that whole sentence again. There's basically 2 routes you can go down when appointing a new manager. You can get somebody who you think will just, solidly, reliably perform to budget, but maybe isn't such a high ceiling, low floor candidate. Or you can get someone who is a massive high ceiling candidate who also maybe has a bit of a lower floor if it goes belly up. Now, what John is saying, I think, is that this is now more the time to go for a safe and steady candidate and not such the time to go for a risk, high ceiling, low floor candidate. And you know what? I do, to a point, agree that now, compared to a year ago, is more the time to go for a safe and steady candidate. I would probably agree with that, because there is a chance that a safe and steady candidate could get us up, because we will have a top 4 or 5 budget in the league. However, particularly with the talk of the investment falling through or being delayed or whatever, probably not going to affect the summer window, maybe won't even affect the January window. With that in mind, whilst our budget will probably be top 4, 5, 6 in the league, I don't think it will necessarily be top 2 in the league. So I would argue that on that basis, we would still, in my eyes, should go for a high ceiling, low floor manager. We should still go for a risk over a safe and steady manager. So I'm going to disagree with John. And I'm going to put 3 names out there, one of which I think is now pretty much defunct already, in truth. The one that had as my number one shot is Osman Basic, the assistant manager to Miron Muslich. Clearly, as I mentioned earlier in the show, very bespoke setup, style to Muslich, recruitment style to Muslich. Let's just get in the assistant, have it as close as possible, and have that same continuity as Lowe to Schumacher. Have the assistant can step up and can run the show and have that smoothness, that continuity. I do think now, from what I'm sort of hearing,
right, but Sam, it's not comparable, is it? Because Shui had been at the club for what, 2.5 years by the time he stepped up. He was much more embedded in the club. He had also been the assistant manager in a promotion season for us. Not someone who, with great respect to Osman Basic, who seems like a phenomenal, talented young coach. I'm sure he'll go far in the game, but he's not been here very long, and he's less experienced, knows the club less well. I just don't think it's, I think just because it worked once, it's absolutely no guarantee that it'll work again.
Point taken, but that was my gut instinct first choice. That was my gut instinct day one first choice hire, based on the inspiration of appointing Steven Schumacher.
You're not alone, Sam. Sam, in all fairness, you're not alone. Graham, in the first half of the show, did pin his colours to the mast as well. He would happily see Osman Basic appointed as the replacement to Muslich.
Well, me and Graham are great minds thinking alike then. So after my first choice was inspired by the appointment of Steven Schumacher, I'm not going to give my second choice. Steven Schumacher. I'd still have him back. I'd still absolutely have him back. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to pretend I wouldn't. That is the name that would excite me, would get my blood pumping, would get me hopping around the house in joy more than any other. I just feel that after the miserable few years we've had, what a way to reignite the magic, to get the fans back excited about the club again, to get that buzzing vibe about the club again. His house is on the market, but it's not yet sold. He can still take it off the market. I still believe, I'm going to keep on believing that a second spell is going to happen one day, whether it's now or in 20 years' time. Ultimately, look, we know, let's not overthink it. He's won League One before. He knows the club, knows the city, still knows a lot of the players.
Let's not overthink it. He's also only just joined a club in this division on a long-term contract.
But he hasn't started too well with them. which again leads me to the point Schumacher can either do a bloody brilliant job somewhere, or maybe he can do a shocking job. And I just feel that fits in with that high ceiling, low floor. Maybe, just maybe, if Bolton aren't too happy with the start he's made, Bolton aren't really sure he's the right man anymore, maybe they might accept the lower compensation fee. If he'd have done very well, got them to 3rd or 4th in the league and lost narrowly in the playoff final, no chance, because we wouldn't be able to afford his compensation fee. Given he actually did quite badly at Bolton, that might possibly play in our favour in the sense that we can afford his compensation fee. Comment coming up saying, would you take someone who's jumped ship once before? Yes, I would. I'm sorry. My whole earlier answer about Muslich was, unfortunately, everyone in football is a mercenary. Everyone, barring maybe less than 1%, will stay for kind of loyalty or owing something to a club. I think that's less than 1% that will do that. 99%, maybe more, of people in football are mercenaries. They'll act primarily in self-interest, and they will jump ship when a better offer comes along. So on that logic, I'm sorry, yes, Schumacher could end up jumping ship again, but so could anyone who does a good job, by the way. Any of these other names, Osman Basic, Sellers, Duff, Wellens, Edwards, any of these people, if they come in and we're top of the league in December, it would not shock me to see any single one of them depart. Okay? So I don't think that's a logical reason to be against Schumacher. My third choice, which is going to send John off the screen, is the Malmo head coach, Henrik Rydström. So having done some research with a mate of mine offline on WhatsApp, he fits the bill superbly. There's a really good YouTube video, and put it in. It's about Henrik Rydström, Malmo and Fluminense, that he is a manager who is bringing in the tactical, philosophical ideals of Brazil 1970s football into the Scandinavian leagues. His team's average 60% possession per game. It's not sterile. His football basically encourages vertical progression through midfield triangles. I'm just reading my research notes here that me and my friend have prepared. He doesn't have a set formation. The formation shifts fluidly from 4-2-3-1 to 3-4-3. A fullback drops in and one of the wing backs comes up. It shifts fluidly throughout the game to dominate possession. And it's known as being a relationism.
Sam, I think you need to stop, because Stevenage are going to be listening to this and they're going to be working out how to block Henrik Rydström's greens right now on the opening day.
So it's a relationism style. Midfielders can interchange with fullbacks. And the idea being, because we're constantly moving, we're constantly pulling defenders and opposing teams out of position, we can open up those gaps in the space that we can overload and we can attack teams. So he ticks absolutely every box. The high defensive line as well, using a sweeper keeper. Defensive wise is zonal, but obviously very much organised. And by the way, he's won Malmo, the Swedish league, on quite a low budget. They came 5th last season, but the year before they won the Swedish league on pretty much a mid-table budget. I think it could work for Argyle. It's perfect for ball-playing centre-backs. Such, Plegaswalo, Galloway. It's midfielders for high press. Randall could be involved in that, maybe Boateng. And it's a sweeper keeper. Keeper plays a very high line and basically passes out and picks out the players in space when we're creating overloads. So that would be Grimshaw over Hazard. Maybe Hazard might get sold anyway with the good season he's had. But that would be, if Hazard does end up getting sold, that would be Grimshaw. His redemption route back into the team. For Grimshaw, redemption route for Al Hadj and Baidu maybe as well. So he's very much not a very well-known name. That's just as a result of research. It's not really somebody who I think will get the job. But I think if we can bring Henrik Rydström to Plymouth Argyle, we could have a season where we beat Birmingham's points record.
Well,
Sam, oh goodness me, Sam, we're not bringing Henrik Rydström to Plymouth Argyle. Just obviously
would you
not
like to
happening.
rebuke this?
Well, it's so people are saying it's a very hipster shout, and I think it is a very hipster shout, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. Like, who would have thought it was a very hipster shout when when Pompey appointed Oxford's third choice centre back of John Musilio, and they won the league quite comfortably. Hipster shouts can sometimes work. I think looking at his body of work, put it into YouTube. It's only a 6 or 7 minute video about the fact he's basically bringing Brazil 1970s football to the Scandinavian league, and it's really working. So I would go for Rydström as an option for sure.
Adam.
Anyway, that went well, didn't it?
Adam, how'd you follow that one?
Yet, but I'll do my best.
Listen, fair play to Sam, because those suggestions got progressively more stupid as they went on, and the second one was Steven Schumacher. So I didn't think that would be possible. Fair
I mean,
play.
the first one was Osman Bassett, John.
No, I understand that as a shout. I don't agree with it, but I understand it as a shout. The other two are mad. Sorry. Yeah.
And the floor is yours.
Right, yeah. I can understand why Sam went and said that nobody else is going to say these three names, because, I mean, obviously, I get the rationale of some of them.
I would wager that no one has ever said those three names in the same point in history, and will never do so again.
Well, I mean, I might take you up on that offer because I'm still in some group chats with Sam. I am, believe it or not, much closer to John in my way of thinking than I am Sam. I mean, we'll see what happens, obviously. But I do agree. To try and bring us back to some level of sanity, I do agree with a lot of what's been said in John's regard, with how this is not a disaster situation. There's still a lot of opportunity here, and the right appointment can still lead us on the right track. I believe, actually, I may be wrong, and somebody who's really good with Plymouth Argyle dates could correct me, but I believe that yesterday, when the news broke, was 10 years to the day since John Sheridan left the football club.
I think that's right. Yeah, blimey, that is that. Yeah, 28th of May, 2015. Yeah, that's right.
There we go. There we go. Love it. So, and in that window, we did go through a little bit of a recruitment process. It didn't particularly impact our transfer window because we got Derek Adams in. We signed Graham Carey, and he did all right. So, I do think there is scope here to still run a recruitment process, and I'd much rather we get into a situation where we get the right man in than we get a quick appointment in. However, I think it's very likely to be a situation where the right man that we can bring in is also a very quick appointment. And I'm going to put the same name forward, Ruben Sayers, or Sayers, if I'm going to be correct, is available, and I think we should be on the phone to him very quickly to get that deal done. It's an interesting one, actually, because it's two managers in 2 summers who have been unfairly sacked by Hull City, who I've thought would make excellent candidates for the Plymouth Argyle job. I think Liam Rosenior would have done quite a bit better than Wayne Rooney last summer. I think Sellers would be a very natural choice for what we need this summer. And yeah, I'd like to see it quickly. Don't get me wrong, like that would be ideal. But I think we're in a situation where if we can ensure we get the right man this summer, there's still so much we can achieve across this summer and across this season with the right person in charge, because we are the big fish here now, or one of the big fish here now in League One, and we have the opportunity to do this. So I remain optimistic in some ways. Of course, all of this then does rely on my faith that the board will get that appointment right, which draw your own conclusions from the last 3. But I feel as though that there is still opportunity. I remember ending the last podcast saying opportunity does knock here if we back Miron Muslich, and well, look what happened. But opportunity does still knock here because we've got a good chance now to bring someone in who has had success at this level, who we feel like can hit the ground running. I think Sellers is that man, but there are other options there as well. So I feel like a sensible manager would be my choice, not necessarily some guy from Sweden, but we'll see. I like a lot of the shouts that have been put out. I like the sound of Sellers, obviously. I think Edwards is a natural second choice if we're to get turned down in that regard. And yeah, there's plenty out there, and there's plenty of sensible names out there that we could pursue.
Yeah, I think one thing we should probably take from the past is that the name that gets thrown around a lot is often the name that is never in the frame. So whilst I am incredibly guilty of tracking betting markets when it comes to Argyle's head coach, as the lads in the group chat will know, it's safe to say whoever it will be is unlikely to fall into the top 5 in the betting until the very last moment. Just to throw my tuppence in, I think, as John alludes to, I think Richie Wellens would be a good shout. I think compared to the past, when we've sort of been intimating that Wellens may well be somebody we could look at, I've never found it as appealing. But I think Leyton Orient, they got there on merit this year. They didn't get there because other teams were were stumbling towards the finish line. They got there because they deserved to get there, playing some decent football, and they were unlucky, arguably, in that, particularly in that second half against Charlton on Sunday. For those who watched it, they were brilliant against Charlton, albeit you could easily say that they were fortunate to get there given the shenanigans went on in the first leg. But I think Richie Wellens has ability. I think he's got positivity behind him as well at a good time in his career. And I feel like, whilst I'm not wishing to discredit Leyton Orient as a football club, I feel like this would be a good fit for Wellens to try and take that next step. There's always a little air on your side that maybe that Leyton Orient squad might get ripped apart and it might be difficult a second time for him to go again. But the other one for me, absolutely, as John mentions, is Michael Duff. And there's a whole host of reasons why Michael Duff would be at the top of my list. Number one is, if you believe the stories that his family never moved with him over the last couple of years, then they're still based in Cheltenham, which will be a fairly easy commute on a regular basis for him.
Point of order, Cheltenham is as far away from Plymouth as it is from Yorkshire.
Okay. But whatever. But I feel like Michael Duff would be able to fit into the role a little bit better than what he would at somewhere like a Huddersfield. I think if you take the body of work he's amassed in his career, the Cheltenham job was quite remarkable, to be honest with you, to steady their ship and to take them to League One. The way they got to League One as well was fantastic. From there, we then had from there, obviously, he moved to Barnsley. And when he went into Barnsley, incidentally, was a very similar situation to where Argyle are now. They'd been relegated from the Championship. There was a lot of chaos going on around Barnsley. There was a lot of turnover of players. He had to unite them. If you remember, they came down here on the opening day of the season and played really well against us, but just couldn't finish their dinner. Finn Azaz went and got the goal. Am I right, Sam? It was Finn Azaz who scored the goal on that opening day?
Correct. Finn Azaz scored our first and last goals of that season, scoring the opening goal against Barnsley and the third at Port Vale on the final day.
Thank you very much. So that says that. And he went on to turn them around quickly. He gelled them. He united the club. He had the place bouncing. And let's not forget that, as I was saying on X earlier on today, that final third of that League One season, they really were the team who were finishing with a wet sail more than anybody else. They came flying out of nowhere. We went there on a snowy afternoon in March, I think it was, to Oakwell, and they blew us away that afternoon. 3-0 loss. I know Ryan Hardy was through on goal at the start of the second half, I think it was, to put us 1-0 up. But from that moment onwards, we didn't have a kick. Swansea was never a fit. It was never going to work. The excuse was he was going to go closer to home and spend more time with his family, and it was just a cultural mismatch, really, with how he plays and how Swansea perceive they have to play. And Huddersfield actually,
and obviously they're very entitled fans, despite being a bog standard Championship side, absolutely insisted on a rigid philosophy of football and a club way, which of course no one in this chat has ever done about a Championship football club.
No, exactly. And then he went to Huddersfield, and to be fair, I don't think his Huddersfield body of work is as bad as a lot of people would make out. Similar to the Barnsley role and the Cheltenham role, he had to try and put that place back together following relegation. It wasn't in a great way, and they were going okay when, again, their manager pulled the trigger far too early. He panicked. They dropped out of the playoffs, losing 4 out of 5. He panicked, and they actually only went on to win 2 of their next 10 league games without Michael Duff in place. So I think Duff could actually be a really good fit here for Argyle, both culturally with how he's able to unite things, rebuild, pull everyone together, unite on a united front. And he's actually not too far away from how Muslich sets his sides up. It's not too different. He likes to play the 3 at the back with the 5 in a bit of a fluid midfield and a couple up front. So I can see the way that can work for us. But look, as somebody mentioned earlier on, there's every chance that we could throw as many names out here in this 2 hours as we possibly could, and we wouldn't have mentioned who it's going to be. So we'll have to sit tight. Should we go through some questions before we finish? Because we've been going now for nearly 2 hours. Nearly 4,000 people have given up their Thursday evenings to join us. If you did miss that episode of Vera on ITV3, it will be available on ITVX once we are finished, so you won't miss out on your fix of Vera. Let's see what I starred in the comments. A lot of them was obviously about replacements and who do we think we could get in. A lot of questions asking where Sam was. John, is Joe Edwards ready to take the job, or is it too soon? Would you like to see him have a role?
No, because I still think he's a good player. Certainly at League One level. Look, I don't know. I've said this many times on this podcast. This sort of clamour consistently over the last 2 years for Joe Edwards to immediately go into coaching or become the manager. I mean, I don't know. Like maybe this is what he wants, and if so, then fine. Obviously, I'd love to see him stay at the club in some capacity. Not to do a Sam, but it did sort of look like he was waving goodbye on the final day. Who knows now whether that, well, don't know whether that was true in the first place, but if it was true, don't know if that's now changed because of the change of regime. He's very, very important figure for the club, and I hope we hang on to him. And if he wants a role, if he wants to sort of try and get integrated on the coaching side, that's something I would be open to. However, he's not that old. He really, really isn't. I think we talk about him as if he's this kind of grizzled veteran, but he's got a good few years left in him yet as a player if he wants it. And I think we really missed him when he was injured. In the run-in last season. I felt he was not at his best when he came back. I felt he was the weak link in quite a few of those games, but returning to fitness at that level is tough. And I think at League One level, he's proven that he's going to be more than good enough to be a right wing back or a right back for us, or at least a squad player. And so, I really sort of would want to keep him on that side. That would be my personal preference. I certainly wouldn't give him the job. I think he's absolutely not ready for it. It would be a huge promotion, huge pressure on him. Don't think it would be particularly fair on him. Yeah, we looked okay in the couple of games that him and Nance managed as caretakers, but we didn't actually win either of those games, firstly, and we were a bit lucky to get 2 points out of them. One could argue a last-minute equaliser against Bristol City, followed by, a sort of quite patchy draw at Stoke. Yeah, maybe they beat Brentford in the FA Cup. That was a very special occasion. They did themselves proud in the dugout. But how many times have you seen caretakers come in, sort of like steady a listing ship a little bit and then get totally found out, or, when things go wrong, they can't sort of quite turn it around. Joe Edwards might well be a very good coach one day if that's what he wants to do. I think it would be much better for him to work up towards that and to finish out his playing career first. And I don't think, frankly, when we've got so many good options available to us, or options that I think could be good, people who have real pedigree, real quality, real experience at that level, I just think sort of throwing Edwards in as a kind of sentiment thing would be a mistake. So I'm not personally in favour of it. Again, if he wants to sort of start becoming a player coach and start that transition, if that's what he wants to do, then I would absolutely support that. But I think that would be on the kind of lower side of the coaching staff.
Sam, comment stream from Rob saying that if it all falls apart, there's a way back for Muslich here, so that might make things tricky. I know that Kenny's replied immediately saying his position's untenable. The football club have made it pretty clear, haven't they, that Muslich is not returning to England, and that the fact they've wished him all the best for the rest of his career means that even if Schalke isn't to be the club, he has no position when he comes back.
It said he will leave Argyle. It's literally there in the statement. It's not, he'll talk to Schalke and we'll see how it goes. It's not, you might leave Argyle. He will leave Argyle. Those words were there in black and white in the statement. So no, absolutely not a hope in hell of a way back, in my view. Even if the talks of Schalke fell through, he would remain presumably on some kind of gardening leave or some similar such arrangement whereby another club would have to come in for him. And hey, if he's applying for the whole Cologne and Hanover jobs, if Schalke did fall through for whatever reason, then he'd probably find himself fairly quickly in one of those jobs or another job. So no. And by the way, since you've kind of asked it with that question, Joe, I am a little bit, for all of my views on Muslich and the fact that I've hardened on him over the last 24 hours, I'm not a lover of that statement, I have to say. Not at all. I think that it's so easy to react in anger, and it's easy for me to react in anger. But I'm not going to say the club are a disgrace. This, that, and the other. I'm going to get why they've done that. But I feel you have to when you're making statements like you have to, act in the proper manner. You have to act in the proper level of composure, and you have to be respectful. And I think that statement, outright calling him a liar, even if he is a liar, it's not, in my view, maybe I'm being traditional and conservative, the role of what an official statement should do, even if you think that's fully justified. Because like a lot of people, when I voiced this, have said, well, Muslich has called out other people in public. He's called out Dickinson in public. He's called out Rami Al-Hajj in public. He should eat his own medicine. And you know what? Maybe. But even if that's the case, and even if it's morally justified, I'd argue whether it's practically justified, because the rumour that's now increasingly emerging is that it's not actually a release fee that Schalke have met. Possibly there wasn't even a release fee to be met at all. Maybe it's just the case that they've, come in with an offer, we've given him permission to speak, and we're currently now haggling over compensation. If that's the case, the one thing we can do that will devalue him is to publicly say there's no route back. If we just said in the statement he's talking to them, we've reluctantly given him permission, then maybe the fact that we're at least in theory keeping the door open to him coming back, even though it wasn't actually going to happen, the fact that we're in theory not burning those bridges might put us in a stronger negotiating position to negotiate a compensation fee for him. And it's not like we haven't learnt this lesson before. When you publicly slate and trash talk your employees before they go, it tends to drive down their fee a little bit. Morgan Whittaker is another example. He went for $6 million. Now, you may well say that given how badly he was second half of the season, $6 million proved to be an absolute bargain for us and a rip-off for them. But at the time, it wasn't seen that way. At the time, we were all hoping 7, 8, at least 7 or 8. And he went for $6 million. I'm sorry, when you release public documentation and public statements slagging people off before they depart, that devalues them in the market. Now, look, it may be that we still end up doing okay. The reported, even if there wasn't an official buyout fee, the figures that are being reported are about 1 million, maybe plus some clauses for if he gets into the Bundesliga, and maybe a friendly yippee. I'm sure he'll get a lovely welcome back. But, by the way, I'd happily take a friendly if it was at their ground, because if we get a share of that attendance revenue and we get a nice little trip to Germany, I'll gladly take that. But anyway, that's completely by the by. The point being, we might still end up doing okay from it, but I do think we need to respectfully get out of this habit of trash talking our employees before they actually depart. Because whilst negotiations are still ongoing, that devalues them in the market. Yes, I get the argument maybe Muslich deserved it with his behaviour, with his, positioning, that he's, touted himself for moves, and the way he's maybe possibly be seen to dig out other players and other people in the press. But even if he does deserve it morally, one, I think we need to be a bit more classy than that. And two, it weakens our hand negotiating. So that's my view on the matter of the statement. I do feel that I need to, constructively make that point, because I don't want to just dig at the club for no reason, but I feel that it's a point that has to be made because no one else has really made it, and I think somebody needs to make it. So that's my constructive criticism on the statement.
Adam, just a couple of questions to go. This one's for you, obviously, with the transfer centre. What about the Jack McKenzie deal from Aberdeen? Well, as far as we know, there's no change on that, is there?
Yeah, correct. As far as we can possibly be aware, being on the outside of it, there's no indication. I don't think that's fallen through or anything like that. I think Aberdeen have definitely announced that he is leaving the club, which even Coventry didn't do with Patterson before we signed him. So it's a step in the direction. I would be surprised, to say the least, if it didn't happen. But yeah, we'll see. I'd expect confirmation sooner rather than later.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Do you guys have any AOBs?
A couple of things. Somebody's come up many times asking me in particular whether I would take Nanskeville as manager. So I feel that given the fact that this person has asked it about 5 or 6 times, I feel I owed him an answer. What I'd say first of all is Kevin Nanskeville has continuously said that he wouldn't ever want to be the head coach. He wants to remain in a sort of supportive capacity at the club. He said that many times. Now look, I guess it's easy to say if we went in and actually offered him the job, I'm sure he'd be very, very tempted. Do I want Kevin Nanskeville as the head coach? In the absolute most respectful possible way, no. Because I think our co-podcaster on another Argyle podcast and friend of this pod, regular commenter, Tom Kirk, said on our Twitter space last night, he worded it better than I could, in that he said, when Kevin Nanskeville, or if Kevin Nanskeville ever becomes permanent Argyle manager, that puts a finite date on his association with the club. Because he would either end up getting poached if he does well, or getting sacked if he does badly. And I don't want Kevin Mansfield to ever have a finite association with the club. I don't think he particularly wants it either. He is known as Mr. Argyle, and I think he will stay as a head coach in whatever capacity. So that's my view on the Nanskiville scenario. One other slight elephant in the room, and I know, we've been on 2 hours, 10 minutes, and I think Graham alluded to them, but since this sort of second half of the pod, we've not really alluded to them, is the role of Bromby and Partner in this recruitment process. For those who are not aware of Bromby and Partner, they are a consultancy firm who is now not officially confirmed, but the biggest open secret on the Argyle internet, that have been working with Argyle for about 5 months now, and are going to continue to work to support David Fox. As I alluded to earlier, there is a consultancy firm. I think one thing that's really worth noting is that the appointments we've made so far are very much linked to Bromby and Partner. We're clearly relying on their contracts. I'm going to go over why. The 3 primary partners in Bromby and Partner are, hence the name, Lee Bromby, Darius Henderson, and perhaps most significantly for Argyle, Stuart Webber. The appointment of David Fox, I think he perhaps briefly overlapped with Webber at Norwich, or if not, certainly will have mutual associates there. But most importantly, he was the loan manager at Huddersfield when Lee Bromby was there. And Tom Randall, he certainly worked with Stuart Webber at Norwich. So I wonder if we may draw on associations from those 3 people, from Lee Bromby, Darius Henderson, or Stuart Webber. And the obvious name, if you're talking about association with Stuart Webber, it's David Wagner. I think he could very well end up getting the job. He worked with Webber at Huddersfield and at Norwich, did a cracking job there. Ironically enough, he also managed Schalke, of all teams. So I could see him being in contention. And as an absolute left field one that I think I mentioned on the stage last night, and again, I'm probably opening myself up for more mockery here after my earlier 3 shouts, but this, to be clear, isn't one I'm necessarily endorsing, but one I think might creep into contention, is Jack Wilshere. He had quite a good spell as Norwich caretaker manager in 2 or 3 games towards the end of the season after they sacked Forup. When they're bringing in their new manager, they have announced that Jack Wilshere will leave the club as assistant manager with the view that he will eventually try and become a head coach somewhere. He was manager of Arsenal's under-18s. He was then assistant manager at Norwich. And he's probably, next step is to be a head coach somewhere in League 1, maybe League 2. So it wouldn't entirely surprise me. And again, I'm seeing the you expected no comments there, and I expected to see that coming. But to be clear, I'm not necessarily endorsing it. I'm saying that he's somebody who has links to the clubs who we've heavily recruited from, and that he is clearly looking for a head coach job somewhere. So it wouldn't entirely surprise me to see Jack Wilshere get further into the recruitment process than people necessarily want. But anyway, those are the 2 names I wanted to put out there based on their associations with the consultancy firm, who, as Graham said, are also helping with Derby and perhaps some other clubs, which is perhaps its own kind of worms. We can perhaps have our own open table debate about the role of consultancy firms in football. But whilst they are here, without going too down that rabbit hole, it's worth looking, and it's all publicly documented. Put it into Google, Bromby and Partners. You can read it up yourselves. It's worth looking up who these people actually are and who their associates are, because that could be very key to deducting who the new head coach is going to be.
There we go. I think that's just about it. 2 hours, 12 minutes, 41 seconds. A tick under 4,000 people have given up your Thursday evening to be with us. That is absolutely wonderful. We do, I say this trying to promote the podcast. We don't enjoy doing these emergency podcasts because it normally means that something's gone terribly wrong. But when we do bring them to you, they're often very well supported, and tonight has been no different. Huge thank you to all the comments that have flown in tonight, all the questions. Sorry we didn't get around to all of them, but as you can tell, it's 11:15 and we've been going for quite some time. Massive thank you to Graham, to James, to Scott Coyne, who joined me in the first half, to John, to Sam, to Adam, who joined me in the second half. We will be back. I remember sitting here at the end of season review saying that's it until pre-season. We'll see you in the hills of Austria and things like that. Well, you're probably going to see us in 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long it takes to find the successor to Miron Muslich. We will be back the moment that Plymouth Argyle know who their new head coach will be. We will be back in these exact spots, bringing you the next emergency podcast.
Can I just say, Joe, thank you so much for hosting our biannual managerial departure emergency pod. I can't wait till December for the next one.
Well, exactly. It doesn't take much planning because we just get to recycle the same running order as we have the last 6 months. But
listen, when Henrik Rydstrom gets the Brighton job in December, when Man United poach Hertzler, you will not be laughing. No one will be laughing anymore.
Sam Down will stand here and do his best Nigel Farage impression. You all laughed at me. Well, you're not laughing now, are you? Just a couple of little bits that came through for me in the comments. Zach Brown says, we have money, Joe. You said we had loads and didn't need the Cooper money. Well, we don't, because we've managed to recoup that bonus money via a format that we didn't really want to get it in. So
Would have still been nice, though, wouldn't it?
it would have, but we can get it next year. It doesn't devalue.
Model would have gone up, so no thanks.
Yeah, we can get it. We can get it next year. Good luck to Sunderland in the Premier League. I had a very happy significant other and a very happy boss to work with over the weekend, so it went down very well. And all the best to the Black Cats in the Premier League. And finally, one last shameless little plug. Kenny's very kindly read my freelance journalism post on Vital Football this afternoon. Just to let you know, there will be my own thoughts on Muslich's departure because I don't get to give them as the host. So my thoughts will be. You would love the first subheading, John. Considered thoughts. So you will get to read my thoughts on Miron Muslich's departure and where Argo go next at some point tomorrow. I will tweet that out. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to the 4,000 of you who have joined us across the course of the evening. We will see you again in a couple of weeks. Until then, please don't get hung up on every rumor that comes out. Please don't believe every story that you're going to see from the ITKs on X and Free Chat and Passotti. And whatever you do, do not do what I'm going to do for the next fortnight and constantly refresh Odds Checker looking at who's the market move to be the new Argyle head coach. From all of us at the Green and White podcast, thank you very much. See you in a few weeks.